is where we are going to be picking up this morning. Good to see so many visitors this morning. Thank you all for being here, not only to visit your families, but also to come and worship with us this morning. Very clear and needed correction there. Worship with us this morning. We've been taking the time to study the Gospel of John together recently, and we were studying John 18 on Wednesday, and we didn't quite finish. So we're going to finish John 18 this morning. Go ahead and proceed on into John 19. For those of you who walked in, I offered you a handout looking at our discussion questions, and we're kind of an outline of today's class for John 19. Of course, on Wednesday is our singing night, so we won't have Bible class on Wednesday night, but we'll pick up again on Sunday next week, and we'll see how far we get this week to know how far ahead we will be. So be on the look for that. We're going to be continuing on John 18, John 19 this morning. And as usual, before we open up our Bible class, we're going to start with a word of prayer, and if you would, let's bow together. Our dear awesome God and Father, we are so very grateful for another Lord's Day that you have given us to come together this morning to worship you. We pray that our worship to you is pleasing to you and that we will edify all those whom are present. Help us to humble ourselves to your word at this time, that we may learn more about your Son, Jesus Christ, as we look at his death, burial, and resurrection according to John's account of it. Help us to meditate on your word daily, that we may grow in all the things that we need to be pleasing to you. We are thankful for this day, that we also take the time to especially remember your Son, Jesus Christ, at least that the world takes the time to recognize and to give honor to your Son, Jesus Christ. And let this be another day where we worship you in spirit and in truth in all that we do. We thank you for Jesus and his example and all the teachings he gave us when he dwelt among us. And it is through his name that we offer this prayer to you at this time. Amen. Alrighty, Gospel of John 18 is where we're going to pick up, and we're going to continue on and finish chapter 18 and go ahead into chapter 19. So for those of you who haven't been with us before in studying the Gospel of John together, typically we try to use these handouts starting as an introduction, reminding yourselves of the context and some things to be thinking about as we go into our chapter. On Wednesday, we started in John 18, and John 18 begins Jesus' crucifixion. And so John 18, we began looking at Jesus' betrayal and arrest. We saw him go before the Jews on trial, and where we didn't get to was looking about his interaction between him and Pilate. So that's where we're going to be picking up this morning. And a few things I want to remind us of before we go into our text this morning. Again, as far as the context, Jesus is going to the cross at this point. He's no longer teaching his disciples. We saw from chapters 13 all the way up to chapter 18, all of those are chapters on the last night and of Jesus teaching his disciples, equipping them before he goes to the cross, before he is lifted up on the cross and goes away. And so we see here, now we're looking at the crucifixion. We're going into that here. We're leading up to the cross itself. But something we want to take note of, again, these chapters are typically known of as the Passion of the Christ. In the Greek, the Passion, it's the suffering of the Christ. And so certainly we are reading now of Christ's sacrifice, of the suffering he went through on our behalf. And so it's interesting that this kind of lined up for us to study these chapters along this holiday today as well. But a consistent theme we've seen throughout chapter 18, and we're going to continue to see as we go through chapter 19, particularly in John's Gospel. John includes details of Jesus' crucifixion that are not included in any of the other Gospels. And so why does he do that? John gives us these details and gives us opportunity to meditate and to dive deeper on the significance, on the meaning of everything that Jesus is doing, of everything he's giving up for us on our behalf. But also a common thing we see, especially emphasized in John's Gospel, Jesus is in full control the entire time. Jesus is the one who dies. He is the one who's lifted up on the cross. He is the one who is punished, the one who is whipped, who is scourged, and has all these terrible things done to him. And yet, John emphasizes Jesus is in control the entire time. And so we were making those observations as we go through John 18. We're going to continue to make those same observations. Jesus is in full control. And that's a point I want us to remember, to keep in our minds as we go through and read through the rest of the Passion of the Christ, chapters 18, 19, of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Jesus is in full control, and we can see that here demonstrated to us in the text. Before we go ahead and jump into our text, does anybody have a question about the big picture narrative or a question about the narrative in general? All right, let's go ahead and pick up in John 18 where we left off before. And we left off, let's start in verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. Let's go ahead and stop there. For those of you, if you still have Wednesday's handout, I still want to go through those questions before we go ahead and jump into chapter 19. But the first question I asked there is, why did the Jews take Jesus to Pilate? And we want to keep a few details in mind. Pilate asks them the same question. They bring Jesus to Pilate, and he asks them the same question. Why don't you guys go take care of this themselves? But also, I want to take note of something they say. Let's see, specifically, look at verse 31, and the end of verse 31. The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death," which is a problem, because have we read in other places in John's gospel where they wanted to kill him? Yes, I've seen some nods, yes. How many times have we seen that? I mean, how many times have we read of them, they were going to stone him, but they weren't able to because he slipped away, or now wasn't his time? Several times, at least 2 or 3 times we've seen that. So, they give this excuse as, hey, we can't put him to death. It's against our law for us to put him to death. But that's not really what's at play here. That's not really the reasons for not putting him to death. And so certainly there's some ulterior motives here. So I asked the question, why are they taking Jesus to Pilate? Why does John take the time to include these details? What is he trying to get us to see beyond just what is here in the text? What are some of their motivations for bringing Jesus to Pilate? Under the guise of, it's not under our law for us to do that. Thoughts on that? Why might they be taking Jesus to Pilate? Using the excuses that they are. Okay.
I question that statement that they made, that it's not lawful for them to put Jesus to death, but yet they stoned Stephen. Mm-hmm. So, what is that factually true, that they did not think they could not put Jesus to death?
As far as the details of what they're saying, certainly it's not a good excuse that they're using. It's certainly not a good excuse because, like you point out, yes, they will stone Stephen in the book of Acts, and they've also wanted to stone Jesus several times before. So that's not a good excuse for them to use as the reason why they're taking Jesus to Pilate. Some have suggested that they specifically are wanting him crucified, and they perhaps don't have the authority for that. That's possible. I don't know that's the full story there, but that's certainly possible. Perhaps that they don't have the authority to crucify Jesus, and that's specifically what they're wanting for him. That's a possibility, but there's not enough information in the text here where I feel confident saying, yes, that's exactly the reason. Certainly we look at, Kevin, did you want to add to that? Or Gigi? No? Oh.
So, as far as stoning, remember they brought the woman to Jesus, that was adultery and were going to stone. So yeah, they did have capital punishment. And as was pointed out, they wanted to stone Jesus. But I think in this case, not only was that not, they felt that wasn't what they wanted from him, but also it puts on the Romans, because Jesus had followers. And they could say, well, the Romans are the ones that said and because Romans and the Jews didn't get along. And so let's put it off on the Romans, put it in their hands to say, crucify him, so the followers would blame Rome.
Yeah, blame Rome. Also, you think about in the picture, if they put it in the hands of the Romans, perhaps his followers will get scared and they'll dissipate as well. The leader, they put him to death, and we don't want that to happen to us, and it'll dissipate. Except you look at the big picture. Again, the exact opposite happens. They put Jesus to death, and then Christianity spreads. So certainly, that's something that could be going through their mind. But certainly, we look and see these observations in the text here, and we want to be thinking deeper. What are they really trying to do? What kind of strings are they trying to pull here? Because the examples, the reasoning behind this is not good reasoning. Certainly, it's inconsistent with what we've seen them do before.
What's ironic is he references in the text that they didn't want to enter the house because of ceremonial cleanliness, right? So we've had a sham trial. We've had this, they're not going into the house because this is the Passover weekend. We don't want to sham us. There's all these things that are factors in this that they're, letter of the law following supposedly what the Old Testament teaches. But at the same time, we see that they are willing to give up this person. And there might be some element of that they don't want to stone this guy because it's right over. This is right at Passover time, right? There's all these things that are going into play here, but they want to embarrass Jesus. That's what this is about. That's the thing that I think that we're all getting at, is that this is a crucifixion, that they want to embarrass him because of the fact of who he said he is, and they don't want to believe that. And that's some of the troubles. And we see that in the synoptics too, so that helps us kind of get the full picture, because they're playing, this doesn't really reference it, but he goes to Herod, he goes all to different locations, and it's all because of someone that I think is ironic that they want to be religiously pure, but at the same time their motives are totally evil here. And the heart is really what it is about, right? So that's something that maybe we even need to think about.
You're absolutely right. Any other thoughts, comments on what we read here? Yes, Sister Carol.
I just think that they make us see an image of ourselves as a culture now. They were historically a law and order people. You're going to keep the law, down to counting out the seeds for the 10th. But this is the government that is going to hype up charges. And we see that in our own time. This is, I'm sorry, the law and order mind that they are going to show a pretense that we're following the law. You can't help but think about how that works, and the hearts of the people. There's a lot of elements that come in together with certainly the prophecy, with their culture, and the whole thing plays out like a play on a stage. And I just want to add that words matter. But what John tells us gives us that insight that we could not have.
Absolutely. Good thoughts. Any others before we move on? Yeah, Russell.
To the stoning thing, the Romans, they tolerated it, but they did not embrace it. So it really, underneath Roman law, it was in their purview to do all that executions. But they tolerated it, and they let them get away with it. But the clue here of why they're bringing it to Pilate is the first question that Pilate asked them: "Are you the king of the Jews?" And they're trying to put it on Pilate and force his hand to actually do the execution by making it a political issue of, if you don't do this, you will rebel. And that was Pilate's fear, and why he ended up having Jesus executed. He didn't want the Jews to rebel. If they did, it would look bad on him. It wasn't that he couldn't squash it and put it down, he couldn't easily. But he didn't want that getting back to Rome, that he couldn't do his job as the governor of Judea. So they were pushing this off of him as a political problem.
Yeah, they're certainly going to use the Pilate's power to accomplish their deeds. They're going to make this a political issue, which I want to comment on that for a second. We don't ever see that today, right? People making religious things a political issue. Yeah, absolutely not. That's unheard of. But no, it's in the scriptures. It reminded me, it's similar to Carol's comment as well. Something that came back to me from the book of Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. Just like we see constantly, everywhere today, people taking religious issues, making them political issues. I don't know if it's true or not. I heard somewhere today that apparently the president declared today now Trans Day instead of Easter. And whether that or not that's true, again, we see the world pushing to make religious things political. And yet we just read back in John 17 again. Jesus reminded us we are in the world, not of the world. And we're going to see that again as Jesus interacts with Pilate. And we're going to see that some more. People taking religious issues, making them political, using political power to accomplish their deeds. Yeah, Carol.
Thinking about our government in Florida, where the governor says this is a law and order state, meaning that crime will be punished. And it's not to say that at that time there was no crime, because of course the thieves on the cross, and Barabbas who was let go for insurrection, the real insurrection. And you just can see that there was, in this case, a level of the government pursuing what it wanted to punish. And we can look, like you said, there's nothing new in this stuff. We definitely can see that.
Last thoughts then before we move on. All right. Reading through verse 33 to the end of chapter 18. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Certainly another depth of points and applications we can make here from this text. But I want, looking at Jesus' whole interaction with Pilate, why does Jesus speak to Pilate the way that he does? Do you get the sense that Jesus has any ulterior motives, that he's kind of trying to get Pilate to see something in the way he talks to him? What do you see there?
I think it's like the early comments that were made about Jesus. He speaks as one with authority.
Yeah.
There's no image of him standing there hanging his head and mumbling.
Yeah, he's certainly speaking with authority. He has presence before Pilate, which is interesting again because Jesus is, he's the one, he's in chains. And yet, again, it's another point that I think points us to the fact Jesus is still in control. He's still speaking with authority. He's not concerned about, maybe I'll get off and I won't have to go through all this. He's here on purpose. He wants to be here. Maybe he doesn't want to be here, but he's here, and he's dedicated to being here in this spot, and he's speaking to Pilate, and he's doing so with authority. In reading this text, I almost get the sense that Jesus is almost trying to teach Pilate a little bit. And what is he trying to teach Pilate? What do we see Jesus kind of emphasizing to Pilate?
His kingdom is not of this earth, it's in heaven. So
Yeah.
He's ministering to Pilate right now. Even knowing that he's close to death, he's still teaching. That's what he's done for 3 years before this. That's what he's doing at the end.
Yeah, which I think is a significant point. Jesus is going to the cross. He knows he's going to the cross. This is the man who can make sure he doesn't have to go to the cross. And what is he still doing? He's still teaching. That's who Jesus is. He's still working for the Father, doing the work that God the Father gave him to do. Even in a situation like this, when he's about to suffer a whole lot, he's still teaching. And he's teaching the one in authority here. Notice again how much he emphasizes, my kingdom is not of this world. Kingdom is not from the world. Let's see. There was another phrase here that caught my attention. Maybe it was just that. But Jesus emphasizes at least 2 or 3 times here, his kingdom is not of this world. Does that language, the world, this world, does that match anything we read back in John 17? In the world, but not of the world. Again, there's that link there, Jesus using similar language. Except I think it's very interesting, Jesus' interaction with Pilate here is very similar to what I see a lot of conversations, a lot of debates today. Jesus is arguing to Pilate, about his kingdom, and he emphasizes truth. He says, "For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth." Now, we've talked quite a lot about how Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, the life." We are to bear witness to the truth. We are to be united in the truth. We are to be sanctified in the truth. The truth is what separates Jesus' disciples from the world. And even here in this context, my kingdom is not of this world. Again, his kingdom, it's in the world, but it's not of the world. It's separated from the world. And what separates Jesus' kingdom from the world? It's truth. "For this reason I came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. And everyone who listens to my voice, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." But then we see Pilate's reaction. And unfortunately, his reaction is very similar to what we see from a lot of people today. What is truth? You can look in the world and see people trying to speak the truth, to defend the Bible, and people are constantly arguing today, there is no objective truth. There is no truth. What is truth? Making essentially the same argument, at least a similar comment that Pilate is making. People don't want to be confronted with the truth. And yet the truth is what separates Jesus' disciples. It's what separates his kingdom from the world. Because again, as Jesus said back in John 17, we are in the world, not of the world. Sanctified by the truth. Jesus is the way. He is the truth. But he's also the life. We need to live life in the truth. Life in the truth is going to have us separate from the world. And even now, before the cross, Jesus is still teaching. He's teaching one who has maybe physical authority over him, but he does not have spiritual authority over him. The one who is the way, the one who has the authority to say what truth is, he's still teaching Pilate. And I think that's very significant for us to observe and to see here. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. It is separated. It is sanctified by the truth. But even in a moment like this, when he's about to go to the cross, he's still teaching. Anyone want to add to that or take away from that? Yeah, Kevin.
It's interesting because, Pilate, in other Gospels, he sends Jesus to Herod. Like, I don't want to deal with this. And then you remember Pilate's wife, had to, hey, you might not want to mess around with this. So it's almost like when Jesus asked him, are you asking this on your own? Did he know that Pilate, there was something there that, because he did not want anything to do with this. And it was almost like he made him think. And how many times did people ask Jesus a question and he answered the question? He's making them think. And so, when Pilate asked what is truth, I've always wondered, was that sarcastic, like, what is truth? Or if it was, okay, so what is truth? And I just find it interesting. And Pilate was not by any means, Sacred Richard's a nice guy. But there was something about this situation that he just seems like, I really don't want to deal with this.
So I guess you could say, what is truth is not a terrible question, right? That's what we all seek. It matters your heart, obviously. And it's tough to, obviously we don't have no Pilate, we see his actions, but one of the things that we can tell is Pilate is sniffing out the political challenge of this, right? So first of all, he's like, let's call the bluff. I'm going to send out the big bad robber, Barabbas, and see if they're going to do anything about this, because he knows that this guy is tied up in a religious argument, right? And he does not get everything that Jesus is saying, probably. We get that from the context of all these things. But even the way that he, stick it to the Jews when they finally, which we're about to get to, right, when they called the bluff on, we're Caesar's friends, and, they play that card, right? That's how the Jews kind of respond back. And this is all this political pawn stuff that's going on, and they think that Jesus is not in control, but it's completely, as you referenced, right? I think that it's just interesting. And then, Pilate's little slam dunk is he puts it all in Greek and Aramaic and in every language that he is the king of the Jews, so there's all this stuff that goes on. And in Matthew's account, even that, some of the things that Jews even say still make my heart Trevor, when they like put Jesus' blood on us and all of our children. I mean, like some of the statements that are made here are just so terrible. And obviously this is all for God's glory, and as we know, and ironically, this would be that time when this happened. We don't recognize the Easter per se, but this is the Passover weekend, right? I mean, this is when this stuff happened, which is an amazing thing that we know from a historical standpoint of when this stuff happened. But it is interesting to see all this stuff. But that question is not a bad question. It just really matters about your motivation of your heart, I think, is where we need to get to.
I absolutely agree with you. It comes down to, the question itself is not bad. But if you want to know, you can find it. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door shall be open to you. Unfortunately, though, there are many people in the world who ask the question not really wanting to know what truth is. People don't really want to know. Yeah, Jay.
I was going to say that Pilate didn't really want to know the answer to his question, but he was making a point. That in his emphasis of truth, I think, is power. All right? Pilate has all the power. He's got all the power. What do I mean with truth? Whatever I say goes. And you see a lot of that in the world today.
It also speaks to Jesus' character, because Pilate is not threatened by Jesus at all.
Did you guys comment?
I think it's just a great example of unwavering dedication, and that's exactly what he asked us for.
Absolutely. Good thoughts this morning. This is a very context to study together and to make observations from. Any other observations anybody would like to make on this before we move on? Yeah, Russell.
The statement of what is truth is basically, it's a cop-out. I mean, it's what everybody uses today, that your truth is maybe different from my truth. And because of your experience, your truth may be a little bit different from my truth. No, they're a shared experience. We have to agree on something. The sky's blue, the grass is green. If we can't agree on some simple things, then we've got problems, big problems.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he's using it like that, but it is basically the same statement that I hear from a lot of people whenever they tell me, well, that's your truth. No, there is a truth. There is a definitive truth that we all share of certain things that we can see and observe. And then there are some things that we may believe and have faith in. Those things, that's different. But there are certain things that we can know for certain in this world, and that we have to share and experience. I don't think that he's trying to do that here, although he doesn't really have anything to throw Jesus under the bus, so to say, for he's claiming that his kingdom is not of this world. He's not trying to usurp Pilate's authority. He knows that there's no problem here. At worst, he's a crazy man. At best, he is what he says that he is. Because his wife had a dream and said that you shouldn't do this. So he's clinging on. He's trying to find something that he can get out of this whole mess with. And it will evolve on to him sending out Barabbas and them releasing him and Jesus being crucified. But he doesn't get what he really is looking for, I don't think. I don't think he really wants to do this, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think so too. We'll comment more on that as we come into chapter 19. One last observation here of chapter 18, and then we'll go ahead and move on to chapter 19. But obviously, Pilate puts out here, Jesus or Barabbas, who's your choice? And the people choose Barabbas. It's a big picture point. What do the people choose for themselves when given the choice? They choose Barabbas. The name Barabbas means son of the Father, which is ironic because Jesus is the son of the Father. And when it comes time for them to choose which son of the Father do they want, they do not pick the true son of the Father. They pick the one who is a robber. They pick the one who, I believe the other Gospels tell us, is a murderer. Instead of the true son of the Father, they pick a false son of the Father, which is the point, again, we're going to elaborate on later on chapter 19 this morning. But when it comes down to it, they didn't want Jesus. They didn't want everything that comes with Jesus, his teaching, the truth that comes with him. And they chose the false son of the Father, which reminds me a lot of Romans chapter 1, which, as you know, is one of my favorite passages, explaining why the world is so crazy as it is. But people did not honor God as God And so what do? They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped the created. They worshiped the creature rather than the creator. And unfortunately, when man makes an idol and calls that God, you see, they've made God. And if you make God, then who really is God? This is another situation where the Jews, they're making themselves God by choosing Barabbas. Instead of choosing the real Son of the Father to be their king, to release back to them, to bring him back out among themselves, they choose a false Son of the Father so that they can go back to doing what they were doing before, so that they don't have to change, because Jesus comes and demands change, demands loyalty to them. Another example of mankind picking for themselves which God they're going to serve, because that God will serve their own interests. And when you get to pick which God you serve, when you get to create God, the God that you serve, who really is God? You are. It's another example of mankind picking themselves to be God rather than God himself, with their choice of Barabbas here. Any other thoughts on the choice between Jesus and Barabbas before we go on to chapter 19? Yes, Sister Carol.
It's a tiny thing, but we know that lawyers sometimes say, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I'm thinking of that as Christ asking Pilate, don't you think he knew the answer to that? And the purpose, as in the courtroom, was to expose to those who were there. And even, again, in our country now, people wonder, the leadership, is that your thinking, or is someone having you do that? It's a very reflective thought. Again, not new under the sun.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that made me think of something else I wanted to say as well before. Imagine how shocking this is to Pilate. He knows this is all really, they're making it political. It's a religious issue that they're having. Pilate's trying to figure out, how can I benefit from this? How can I make sure I come out on top on this game? Can you imagine Pilate being shocked when Jesus is doing nothing but demonstrating himself to be who he says he is, and they still pick Barabbas anyway? I think that's pretty shocking that they would rather exchange the false Son of the Father, that they would take the murderer, that they would take one who is way worse, in the way the world thinks. They pick him instead of Jesus because they hate Jesus that much. I think that's shocking, that or at least I imagine it would be shocking to Pilate for him to see their choice in that. Last thoughts, comments, questions on anything chapter 18 before we go into chapter 19.
You said it earlier, but in all of these incidents and all of this wrangling and juggling, God's in control.
That's right. All right, chapter 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out, wearing a crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered in his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." Let's see here. Do you think Pilate wants to to crucify Jesus? I think, Russell, you commented on that earlier, but what do you think? Does Pilate actually want to crucify Jesus? No, I don't think so either. He's trying to get him off. He punishes him. Hey, look, I did all this to him. That's enough, right? That's got to be enough. But it wasn't enough. Having him scourged, whipped, beaten, put the crown of thorns on his head, mocked with the purple robe, that wasn't enough for the Jews. They wanted more done to Jesus. Robin, did you have a comment?
I've been somewhat curious or had some doubt because all of this is going on, and he knows that Jesus knows he's about to be crucified, and all he's got to do is maybe just recant, but he's not backing down. He's not saying, he's not really defending himself. It's just kind of like leaving it up to them. And he's got to be wondering why. This guy really thinks he's who he says he is.
Yeah, Kevin, do you want to add to that?
I mean, yeah, and we're about to get into it, but the next verse, it says, from that moment, Pilate kept trying to release him. He kept trying to get out of it. And then that's when the Jews, they bring Caesar into it. You know, if you release him, you're no friend of Caesar. And, you know, that's putting him in a very tough position.
Jesus, you want to
Jesus even says that for this reason he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. So he's almost letting Pilate know that. The ones who are really guilty are
that statement of Jesus is very interesting there. You know, as you commented on, you know, Jesus makes it very clear that whoever delivered him over to Pilate, that they have the greater sin. I mean, Jesus acknowledges all their intentions, their ulterior motives, and playing the game the way that they do. It's not really about truth anymore. They just want him gone. And they're going to use somebody else's power to make sure it happens. Jesus seems to know that and comments on that and tells that to Pilate. You know, God knows. God knows our intentions. I think of someone who perhaps is struggling in sin and they're trying to justify their sin through whatever arguments or reasoning they're giving. But God knows our intentions. And it makes me think of a situation like this. God knows our intention. He knows if we're trying to play by some other rules to make it or what I'm doing or what I'm wanting to do is okay. God knows. And Jesus seems to acknowledge that is the greater sin, that you would try to usurp God, that you would still try to usurp his truth, that you would still try to usurp his authority. It's a very powerful point that not only for this situation, but this kind of scares me. And thinking about our lives as Christians, we got to make sure that our intentions are pure and they're living truth and being sanctified by truth, obeying God, being pleasing to God is the most important thing, and that we don't look for ways to get around the law. Yeah, Gigi.
I think it's also interesting the timing of this too, because had he done this 100 years before, would they have, gone through and crucified him? Were they not corrupt enough? Were the Jews not to be able to see that he was the Christ? And so he waited for the opportune time where they were, corrupt enough that, we had this contradiction.
Yeah. I never quite thought of it before. Certainly God's timing, it's perfect timing. He knows, and he knew that Jesus knew when his hour had come, and now was the time.
To look at our lives and make sure that we're not, getting so.
Other thoughts, observations, what we see here in this text?
Speak to the term greater sin, or do you have any thoughts on the term greater sin?
So are you asking me, do you mean, is this literally like it's a sin that's above other sins, or is that kind of what your question is leading to?
I don't know. I mean, greater sin, I think about, in one respect, sin is sin, and we condemn the Jews for, these Jews here, for putting Christ on the cross, but our sins it's no different. Our sins are no different than their sin in that regard. We like to point the finger at them being responsible, but we're responsible just as much. So the greater sin, I don't, in what context is he speaking when he tells Pilate this?
Yeah. My thought, this is just my thoughts on this, not necessarily anything that's from the text here, but my thoughts here on the greater sin. We think about what sin is. Recently, a while back ago, we had an invitation. We talked about all the passages that say sin is this, sin is that. And one thing we see about sin is that God considers sin. He considers, thinking back to Ezekiel 18, he considers, in some parts, sin is considered to be treachery against God. And certainly, treachery is treachery. You did something against somebody else, and that's the issue, that you did something, you sinned against God. But certainly, if you think in a relational sense, there are things in every relationship that I do think, cause a bit more damage, that we would consider a greater treachery based on our own sensitivities. Between me and my wife, we know the things that push each other's buttons more than the other, and if I push that button on purpose, I know that's going to hurt her more, because that's a pressure point for her. It's still treachery. It's still sin against her, just like with all sin. But I wonder if perhaps part of what Jesus is getting at here is just the level of treachery that they're willing to go for against Jesus here. You think about, again, the context here. Jesus is making the point, you have no authority over me at all unless it has been given to you from above. Therefore, the ones who have delivered you over me have the greater sin. Again, they know that Jesus is the Son of God. They don't want to accept that. And instead of just being stubborn about it, they're now going to bring other people into it, bring political power into it to make sure that he's killed and to achieve their goals. I mean, they're going through so many extra hoops to make sure their ends are met. To me, and maybe this is just my own human thinking, but perhaps I wonder if God looks at that, if Jesus sees that and knows that and sees this as greater treachery. Especially consider the point we just made about them choosing Barabbas over Jesus. I mean, it is extremely offensive and treacherous to God when we exchange him for another God so we can do whatever we want, really making ourselves God. God, I don't respect your rules. I don't honor you as God. I'm going to be God by giving the guise of I'm going to worship this God that's going to let me do whatever I want. There are things like that I certainly think, in a relational sense, could equate to greater treachery. Now, at the end of the day, it's still treachery. But those are my thoughts when I read through this. I didn't read anything specifically on this. Is he referring to anything specific? Again, these are just my thoughts for your consideration here, and what is he referring to? At the end of the day, again, Jesus makes it very clear to Pilate, the guys who have delivered me over to you, they're the ones committing the greater sin here. And so that's what we have to work off of. Yes, sir.
There are some consequences for this that have to be to the Jews that are this has to come to an end to some extent. Their religion is coming to an end. Now, there are people that still hold on to this, but can they really practice Judaism to the way that they're supposed to? I mean, we know that if you read Matthew 24 or 25, you're reading about some of those consequences, right? That's in 70 AD, they destroyed the temple. They couldn't name if they destroyed the Dome of the Rock and put a temple on there now, they have no idea who the high priest is and serve on that at this point. There are things that are consequences for this, and that could be part of that. But I do think that he is telling Pilate, I know that they're the guilty party who are pushing this, and to let it happen, because it had to happen, right? I mean, there is an element that everybody that sins on earth, which is all of us, right, that we are guilty, and we needed this sacrifice. And I do think that there is an element that we have to acknowledge, that God had to end the Jewish religion as we know it, because he had a new age, and this is the Christian age, and this is the age of the church that we hope to be completed in heaven someday, right? So these are all those elements that are big picture things that, that they're getting glimpses of. They don't even understand yet, that Jesus kind of sees the whole picture. It's like that road to Emmaus, with Luke. They're completely baffled by this. This all is happening in the morning, by the way, right? Early. And, by 3 o'clock he's dead. And we basically seeing this play out, and we have the big picture. So I think that that's kind of where I would lean in that comment about the bigger sin.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. Jesus' overall main point that I would argue that he's making is, I know they're the guilty party. I know that they're the ones who are behind all this, and so for us to take that. That is the bell. Okay, we will pick up on verse 12 on next Sunday, and I'll go ahead and prepare the questions for the next class period, so we'll be ahead on that. Thank you for your comments and questions this morning.